Hello friends! This video lecture is going to cover the basics of MLA works cited and in-text citations, which are an important part of what we call ethos. Developing ethos in your paper is about demonstrating credibility, right? We want to build trust where the reader knows that the information that you've compiled and the argument you've made is found on fact and different perspectives rather than, say, an opinion, in which you wouldn't necessarily need outside research. So there's a lot of ways to develop ethos, right? So using several sources, making sure the audience is the appropriate audience for your argument, using a fair tone, not showing that bias. And then up here we have paraphrasing, quoting, and attribution. Attribution being the use of author tags and citations. And those citations linking to the works cited page and involving in-text citations, meaning in the actual body of the document itself. When do you need to cite sources? Anytime that you quote from a source or borrow an idea, even if you're using your own language to deliver the idea through paraphrasing or summarizing, and any factual information from a source that is not common knowledge. Now, common knowledge is a sort of tricky concept, right? The idea being, is this information really widely known, right? I mean, something like, for example, gravity. We all pretty much know about gravity. That's common knowledge. When in doubt, cite the source. If you think it's common knowledge, but you're, not sure, just go ahead and cite the source. It's better to be safe than sorry in this case. So let's first talk about the works cited page before we start talking about in-text citations, because those in-text citations will always send us to the works cited page. So works cited has all the sources for your paper listed alphabetically. Now we'll talk about which information we are placing alphabetically in later slides. There are hanging indents. I'll show you an example in a moment. 1-inch margins, last name and page number in the upper right-hand corner, and page numbers that continue from the body of your paper. So here's an example. We've got that centered works cited, no underlining, no bold, no italics. Your last name and the number corresponding, right? So with this works cited being the last page, we know there are 5 pages before it. This hanging indent is when the line starts flush here, but then indents on later lines, right? So we'll talk about the tricks to get those, the hanging indent to work in your Word document at a later time. Now when we talk about the alphabetizing of these sources, right, we have A, C, D, D, and we'll talk about the different criteria here, but right now we can see that at the beginning, Anthony, Sharon Anthony is the name, David, Hawksworth, Joseph, Merkala, right? So again, we'll talk about the order here in a sec. The core elements of a citation for the works cited has very specific punctuation, author, period, title of source, period. Down here, version, comma, number, comma. And these are going to correspond with the next slides. So you'll see here, author and period, right? The period comes after the author. We're going to start with the last name and then the remainder of the author's name after a comma. So here, for example, Baron, comma, Naomi S., meaning the first name is Naomi. When there are 2 authors, list them in the order they are presented in the source. The second author's name should appear as first and last name in contrast to the first author. So here's an example: Michael, Doris, separated by commas, and Luis Idric, right? So it reverses here with the second author. When there are 3 or more authors, list the first author followed by this term et al. So for example, Anne Burdick et al. We know in this et al. That there are at least 2 other authors and sometimes several more. Sometimes the author is not a person, an organization, or an institution can be authors. We talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the unit when I mentioned that the syllabus you receive for this class has multiple authors, right? There are state laws, there are university-wide procedures, there are those specific to the department, and then there are those specific to me as your instructor. All of us have had a hand in shaping this course. So here, for example, United Nations, right? This serves as the organization who is the author. There is not a single person in the United Nations who is being credited. It is the group itself. When there is no author named, move on to the second core element, the title of the source. Do not list the author as anonymous. If the author is not there, do not include it. The next component, title of the source, again followed by a period, is if it's part of a larger work, you'll want to include quotation marks. So for example, if it's an essay, a story, or a poem from a larger collection, this would be the actual source in quotation marks, followed by in italics, the larger source that it comes from. Right, so here, for example, Questions of Transport, reading Primo Levi, reading Dante. So this is the essay or article from the larger publication, the Georgia Review. Now, the title itself of the larger work, again, is in italics. If you're not citing a particular section of a book, for example, you would just put the italics of the source, right? So there's no quotation marks here because we're looking at the entire volume. So here's an example of a posting or article on a website. Parentheses again, for the article, so many books being the website. So the container is the larger whole that holds or contains the source that you are documenting. Going back to the earlier example of Naomi Barron, PMLA is the actual container in which Redefining Reading is found. A website which contains articles, postings, or other work, right? So we looked at that the last slide, so many books being the website where this article appears. Other contributors, so there are a lot of ways in which we can cite based on the type of media, right? Adapted by, for example, the Harry Potter books, right? I mean, they started as books and then they were adapted into movies. Directed by, if it's, for example, a play that you're citing. So, for example, here we have Roger Chartier, The Order of Books. So we know that this was originally published in another language because it says translated by Lydia G. Cochrane. Version is if there are multiple publications of the same source. This example is using the Bible, the Authorized King James Version, but there are also reprints where there might be some alterations made, for example. The number, if there is a series of them, for example, dictionaries, encyclopedias, academic journals, right? They work in volumes and numbers because they continue publishing. So here, Naomi Barron, Redefining Reading, found in the larger container of PMLA. It's volume 128, and it's number 1, right? So within volume 128, there are multiple volumes, right? So this is sort of a layering effect. The publisher, right? So we've got Oxford Up, right? So starting with the last name, first name, the entire text, and then who published it. For something like film and television, it might be the production company, for example. Here's one of blog networks, right? So again, author, article, larger container, and then Scientific American blogs being where we find this. Publication date following the publication, right? So here we have John Belton, Painting by Numbers being the article, Film Quarterly being the journal, volume 61 of Film Quarterly, number 3 of volume 61, and then here's the date, spring 2008. This is when it was published. And then location, right? So this is going to depend on the type of source. If it's a book, it's going to be the page numbers, right? Versus if it's online, you might include the URL here. Preferably the URL is considered stable and does not change. DOI, when we're looking at the databases, Digital Online Indicator, this is going to be the most reliable of any way to cite a source in terms of where you found it. So if I click this DOI right here, it's going to take me directly to this source. Performance or lecture, right? You might include where this actually took place. Physical objects, right? Like what museum is this art piece in? So now that we've looked at some of the basics of what is included in a citation for your works cited, we'll talk about citing within the actual research paper itself. Now, a citation is a type of attribution. And a citation has two parts. The in-text citation, again, where the citation is made in the body of the work, and that citation references where we will find the citation, the citation on the works cited page itself. So the two pieces of information is what source and the page number. And there are two ways to achieve the transmission of this info or to cite this info. There's the parenthetical citation and the narrative in citation. So a narrative in citation is introducing the source as though it is almost a story, right? Like a narrative being a story. So give the author's full name, the title of the piece, and then you may also consider including, position, level of expertise, any background. And then once you have established the source, if you reference it in later moments in your paper, you can just use the last name. So one example, in his 1971 children's book, The Lorax, Dr. Seuss, tells the story of blah, blah, blah. So that's the narrative. When you use that, instead of including the author's name in parentheses, you can also include it in the text as an author tag, right? So according to Naomi Barron, right? So according to, that's a way of attributing the following information to this author. Here, right, Naomi Barron being the name, and then 194 shows us what page number. So if I were going to go to the works cited, I would look first for Barron, and then within that source, I would go to page 194, right, if I wanted to check it, for example. Author's last name is omitted from the parentheses here because it appears narratively, but page number still being in parentheses. In-text citations are equally important when paraphrasing. So for example, while reading may be the core of literacy, Naomi Barron argues that literacy can be completed only when reading is accomplished by writing. Right, so we know that this is Naomi Barron's idea, but in the words of this particular author. Another one, for example, while reading may be the core of literacy, literacy can be completed only when reading is accomplished by writing. Notice the difference here, because Naomi Barron comes in narratively, we don't need her last name in the parentheses, whereas this paraphrase does not include Barron's name, so in order to credit her ideas, we include last name and page number. Again, once you've created that works cited page, it's going to send, those two are going to collaborate, the in-text citations and the works cited page, right? So Seuss is the key for the citation because it's the first word that appears on the works cited for this source. When there's no author, your in-text citation will still be the first piece of information in the works cited entry. Usually it will be the title, right? So Reading at Risk, A Survey of Literary Reading in America. We don't know who wrote this, or it might be collaboratively published, for example. So we're just starting with the title. An in-text citation narratively, right? So Reading at Risk, notes. We're treating this text as if it were, almost as if it were the author. And again, because it comes narratively, we don't need anything in the parentheses except for the number. Or, for example, here, despite an apparent decline, etc., reading 3. It's just the first word of this longer title, helps us really keep things kind of condensed. So first word and then 3. So some final thoughts: you need both elements, the full citations on the works cited page and those in-text citations, in order for it to count as citing. And again, I've said it many times in this video, it's because those in-text citations will tell any reader who is critical, you can go to this works cited page and see for yourself what I'm quoting, what I'm citing.